which is weird. So we'll see what happens.
Oh, it says meeting is now streaming live on Facebook.
All right, that's the dream. So hopefully it'll like kick in and we'll be ready to roll in a few seconds. Can you drop the questions in the chat just so to?
Yes, ma'am. Oh, that's so cute. I see it on Facebook.
Oh, really? This is real life. It's happening, y'all. I'm glad you see it on Facebook because I sure don't. So if you see it on Facebook, then you could just keep moderating a little bit with if there's questions that come through.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm excited to chat with you. It's gonna be fun. We'll start in like 5 minutes, so we just get to like shoot the breeze for a second. But I'm looking forward to this. This is gonna be fun. At least we know it works.
I don't know how you did that.
This is definitely Ricky officially calling me back. Lord, let me slide on these do not disturb buttons. Oh, this is gonna be fun. This is just like a fun little intro, fun little 4 minutes of all the things that happen. Love it though. We love to see it. Dun, dun, dun. How should we start? Should we start with like the chisme while we get started? I'm like, I don't know, all the chisme belongs also in the chat, but you know, it is what it is. Let me see if I open up the live stream, if I can. Oh gosh, there we go. Okay, we have some people joining us though, which is exciting. Drop some comments if you're coming through. We want to see who's here. At least we're getting all the like technical glitches out right now before we start at noon. But this is going to be really fun to kind of reflect with Berenice and be able to introduce ourselves and kind of give you all of the juicy information that we've been reflecting on these past years. So thank you for sticking with us in these fun little buffer moments, because we'll be ready to go in 3 minutes. But yeah, I'm like, how is your morning this already, V?
I opened up the live video and it
like I know, right? All of the glitches are coming through. I'm excited though because I think the class that I am teaching right now is gonna, at least I'm hoping some of my students are gonna be joining us. So I'm really excited to kind of hear their questions and their comments, and a lot of what we talk about in my class is relevant to this conversation. So I'm excited.
That's true. I'm so excited. I wonder if I can see their comments though. I don't want to open this up because I don't want the video to like play your voice and have it be bouncing back. But
yeah.
Or I wonder if does it show up on your end if anyone like drops questions?
It does, because I just have it on my phone. I have it on mute, and so I can just see the questions. So I can navigate the questions if there's any comments that come through.
Yeah.
But at least it is, I'm just over here just saying, at least it is live, okay? Because we were real stressed on whether it was going to be live or not, because Facebook was trying us. But thankfully it's all live.
Technology now. Like I thought I knew things, but I don't think I know as much as I thought I knew, like especially on the back.
Oh my God. Well, let me just go ahead and share it then on a little bit extra, share it on the socials. But I'm really excited for this conversation though. I'm like trying, I think I said a little prayer before just because I really wanted to like be there spiritually to reflect with you, be as present as possible because we're really digging deep today.
I feel like I drew up some, guiding questions and stuff, and like I've reflected on it a little bit, but I'm excited to see if what'll come out of my mouth. Because sometimes what I think is gonna come out doesn't come out.
I hear you. I think I know for this one too, I didn't like script anything, or it was just really very, very raw in the moment. Real time is truly what will be captured. But I'm just curious what's going to come out of this conversation too. Like what truths will we figure out today? which is really honestly a reflection of our relationship. But
all these revelations as we're like talking.
I did have one that I'm excited to share with you. It just kind of like blew my mind this morning a little. We'll see if it comes out as polished as I had it in my head earlier, but excited for this. Well, we are right on the dot. So should we go ahead and get started? I see Jasmine is here with us. Hey, Jasmine, welcome. We are excited. It's right. We're very prompt, aren't we? Okay. 12 o'clock noon. We said noon. We're going to begin. But maybe we'll wait for people to slide on just a little bit more, maybe give like a minute buffer. We've been on here for a second trying to figure out all the technical side of Facebook Live since this is our first Facebook Live. So I'm proud of us though.
I'm glad we got on here earlier too, because like, imagine if we hadn't.
It would have been stressful, okay? Because like, yeah, that is everything technology wise right now too. It just feels like you have to have at least 10 mistakes or 10 like things that you couldn't prepare for. So the fact that we're even live again, I feel like is miraculous. This is great.
First Facebook Live.
Yes. So, all right. Well, the crew is coming through. Oh, yes. Emily, welcome to you. So excited you're here too. I'm going to go. I love it. Love to see it.
Like I want to watch on Facebook like the video, but it kind of trips me out because it's like slower than
Yeah. Like I can't look at it. It's truly a time machine on here. Like, I don't want to see what just happened 5 seconds ago. I really don't.
I'm gonna relive it.
All right. Dun, 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 dun. All right. Well, let's go ahead. Shall we start? I feel you know what, this is a reflection of me being a little impatient right now though. So maybe if we should slow it down, just let me know.
No, I feel like we're good. And either way, we're gonna save the live on our Facebook page.
That's true.
So people can watch and stuff. But we do have a lot of questions. So
yeah. I know we might as well start for real and just dive into this. So I can introduce this chat and then maybe throw it over to you to introduce yourself. But we're super excited to be coming to you live. Okay, first time ever, Facebook exclusive on our journey thus far. So we're going to be introducing ourselves. We're going to be reflecting on Latinx Ed, which is the nonprofit organization we both work for and also have created in many ways. And just kind of talk about the reflection and the growth that we've had these past 2 years of Latinx Ed and kind of also of knowing each other. So I am excited. So I think once we introduce ourselves, we'll just kind of explain to you all how we met each other. But we'll start off with some introductions and then let's just take it from there. Let's let the real talk, begin.
Like I said on my Facebook, if you see us cry, mind your business. Here's my yeah, so I can introduce myself. My name is Berenice Poncesoria. My parents were both born and raised in Michoacan, Mexico. They're actually from the same hometown. I tell people this all the time, but like they didn't know each other growing up, and then they met like when my dad came back for some party, and he asked my mom to dance, and then my mom found out he had a girlfriend. This is the chisme, the real talk. And she said no to him, and so she said, you need to go break up with your girlfriend. And so my dad went on the spot to go break up with his girlfriend. And he wanted my mom. And then he came back and asked my mom to dance, and then they went to go dance and they fell in love. And 28 years later, they got married. And then a few years after that, here I am in Goldsboro, North Carolina. Well, actually, technically Pikeville. I'm like 10 minutes away from the city. And growing up, I went to an early college. So I got my associate's degree here in Wayne County. And then I transferred over to UNC Chapel Hill. Thought I wanted to be a poli-sci major, but ended up falling in love with public policy and then education policy. And so I got my I majored in public policy with a minor in education and a concentration in education policy. And a year after beginning this journey at UNC, I took Ricky and Elaine's class that fall 2 years ago. It's crazy because I was reflecting the other day and I realized I've spent more time with Ricky and Elaine than I have without Ricky and Elaine in my journey at UNC.
Wow.
And then after that semester, I guess we'll get into that later, but at Latinx Ed, I started off as an intern, um, and then went up to program assistant, and I managed communications and then also like research and development. Um, and Elaine, you can do your
Yeah,
introduction.
I'll take it away and I'll kind of bring the story to kind of where it intersects with us in particular. But so my name is Elaine Townsend Utin. And for me, my journey, my birth, okay, starts in Peru in particular. So I was born in Lima, Peru, and then came over to the US though when I was really young. So I grew up in the rural South, so Georgia, Arkansas, North Carolina. North Carolina has been home for the longest, in particular, Waxhaw, North Carolina, Union County. Very proud of that now too, in particular. So, Union County's out here, come through. But that journey especially it was unique to be a Latina in the rural South in very predominantly white spaces. Unfortunately, wasn't able to connect with my culture in school settings in particular, and didn't have any representation in whether that was the teaching staff to the administration that reflected my culture. And so I really relied on the home space with my mom and my abuelita to really kind of learn more about my cultural background and kind of who I was in that respect. But that was still part of the journey. I'm also a first generation college student like you. And so we're over here, also trying to figure out how to navigate all these systems. And so for me, that was a huge role to play for me in trying to figure out how to get to college and how to help my siblings figure out college. But really my own journey was really stressful at times. And so that was just a huge, again, very shaping part of my journey. I was actually just getting to college and that big milestone for me. So when I actually got to UNC, I always say by the grace of God and the support of my family, made it to UNC. And was able to study middle grades education. And so after changing my major several times, but found education as that thing that really grounded me, that really gave me life, that I just had so many revelations about who I was and kind of where I was wanting to go. And so that journey after graduating from UNC, headed over to South Korea to teach English for 2 years through the Fulbright English Teaching Assistantship. Loved it, recommend it. If you're even thinking about what to do after college, that's a great thing to bookmark. And so after that, came back to the US. I knew I needed to go to grad school. And because of my scholarship I was a Gates Millennium Scholar. And so that gave me 10 years of academic funding. So I wanted to continue using that. And so I ended up going to Harvard, another kind of reset on my whole first generation graduate student experience, and trying to figure out what that was like, or how to navigate it, honestly, how to get there, and then also how to get through it. But studied technology, innovation, education there for my master's, and came back to North Carolina after my master's, got married. And that was after a long-term relationship for long of that time. But we ended up getting married. And then I also started working for the Scholars Latino Initiative, which if you're familiar with our history of Latinx Ed, that's really where our story started. That started for me in undergrad, working as a mentor, and then eventually as a leader in serving Latinx students in North Carolina, but specifically Chatham County. And so that is part of the journey. I think that the next chapter was really starting this nonprofit though in particular, and kind of being inspired by our work, but wanting to deepen it, wanting to really center on positive racial ethnic identity development. What does it mean to be Latino, Latina, Latinx in North Carolina in particular, and really sink our teeth into that side of things, and also be able to expand our essentially the resources that we had for our community, be able to go beyond our location and actually serve statewide. And so Latinx Ed, or Latinx education, was really founded with that vision in mind, and that desire and hunger to really broaden our impact. I'm also creating systemic change too. And so right when this is where our story started to intercede. So right when we started the nonprofit, so me and Ricky Hurtado, who's the other co-founder, you'll hear us talk about Ricky a lot. We're going to give you all the cheeseman. I'm just kidding. But Ricky's awesome, and he's such a pivotal part of this vision as well. And so I was thinking about this today, and I was like, wow, 2018, that's when we started the nonprofit. And when we started the nonprofit, I was pregnant, and I was just thinking about, like, those things kind of feel isolated, but very much connected for me too, of thinking about going through that journey of becoming a mom, and then also the journey of starting a whole nonprofit, very in some ways a bit non-traditionally, especially with a nonprofit, and kind of how is and just starting it, but we did it nonetheless, and we were really determined to bring this vision to life. And the first semester that we started Latinx and we're just getting everything on the ground, we taught for the first time. We co-taught together, and we taught Education 510 at the School of Education at UNC, and it was called the Mexican American Experience in Education, and we kind of remixed it to the Latinx Experience in Education. But that was where Berenice was a part of our group of students that we ever had together, and so that was an incredible experience. I know, right? This is where the story gets juicier, because Berenice, of course, a superstar in our class, just dropping all the real talk, connecting with all of these topics of, like, what is it like to be Latinx in education? What is the history that we have, that our community has navigated for century, right? And so that really, I think that was part of our forming of a relationship, and the fact that were interested in what we were doing was really exciting. And so that's kind of where I guess we can kind of switch it up, and you talk a little bit about we talk about our roles a little bit too, as they kind of how they came into being. But Latinx said, just to kind of pause there for a second, we're a nonprofit. We're based in Chapel Hill currently, but our efforts are accessible statewide, and that's the vision. We're still, as you can tell, as it's telling the story, we're still in many ways in the infant stage of the nonprofit. So we're going on 2 years this October, which is super exciting, but we've done so much in that span of time. Especially with our flagship program, our first really launch in kind of initiative called Somos Carolina, which is all about identity development and leadership development for Latinx students starting in middle school, so going even younger, middle school all the way to high school, and helping them figure out, how to tap into who they are as Latinos. What does that mean? Where's the gifts and the talents that we get to take from that? But then also, how do we manifest it in our roles as leaders and learners in our communities, in our schools, etc. And so that is also part of where Berenice came through, in being able to help us with the evaluation side of it all. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, V.
Yeah, I think this is a perfect kind of little segue. Because now that I think about it and like I reflect back, like it really feels like it was, I mean, at least I'm spiritual, so like I think of it as like divine intervention, because at the time that I had signed up for your class and everything, and I remember before that, like my first year, all the Latinx people on campus were like, have you met Lane and Ricky? Like, you need to meet them. And I was like, I don't know who these people are. And I signed up for your class, and I don't think at that point, like, I think it just said staff. I don't think y'all had signed up to teach the class, or like,
Not yet.
yeah, I had that on Connect Carolina. And I remember, like, since I came in with my associates, I was only going to be there 3 years. And I was thinking about like post grad plans and like, what am I going to do with my life? Like, what are my biggest aspirations? Like, do I want to go to grad school? And I remember seeing this like flyer for the McNair Scholars Program. I think I don't know, it was somewhere random. And it was like it's a PhD pipeline kind of program for undergraduates who are minority, low income, first gen. And I remember seeing it, and I was like, PhD, like, no, like that, that couldn't be me. Like, I just didn't see myself as someone who could do her PhD at all. And so I just ignored it. Like, it just didn't seem like an option in my head. And then I remember coming across it on Twitter again, and I was like, let me just click on the link. And so I just clicked on it, and then I read it and like read the requirements, and I kept stopping myself so many times from applying because I think they take like rising juniors, and I was already well into my junior year. And I was like, no, like it's already past a deadline to apply. And either way, like, I'm already a junior, like I did early college, I have my associate's degree, like they probably wouldn't accept me anyway. Like I just came up with 1,000 reasons of why I shouldn't apply in my head, and it was literally just me stopping me. So I remember like I was like, you know what, like I'm just gonna email them. I'm gonna email the director and ask her like, can I still apply? Like, am I eligible? And she like immediately emailed me back. She was like, yes, like send me all your application materials and we can schedule you for an interview. And so I went through with it, and it all just happened so fast. And I remember like at that same time when I was considering grad school and everything, um, I had I was taking your class, and I, obviously like I was reflecting on how validated I felt, because I didn't realize like all of the things that we were discussing in your class, like they weren't just things that I felt inside of me, like they were real and they were systemic issues, and no one has really like worked to address them as much as they should. And I remember like in my head thinking like, oh my gosh, how amazing would it be to like start a nonprofit one day and like be focused on all these issues that we're talking about in class. And then that, what was it, like November? No, October, right?
October 2020,
20, yeah,
October.
yeah,
Yeah.
October. And they had announced it to our class, and I was like, I have to go. And they gave us a discount code after I bought my ticket, but I was like, it's fine. It's fine. I'm supporting Latinx youth. um, and so I went, and I thought it was just a gala, I think. That's what I thought in my head. And then you announced a nonprofit. And I remember I was live tweeting. And I remember
Oh my
that.
God, I remember that. Yes.
And what was happening? Oh yeah,
This
y'all announced a nonprofit.
very
I was
yeah.
like, were they just hiding this from us? Like, but they're launching this whole nonprofit. Like, I thought y'all had it like established, like it was a thing, and then y'all announced Somos Carolina, and it was like helping Latinx youth. And at that point, I was like, middle schoolers, no, that's not for me. I'd always thought about working with like higher ed and high schoolers, but I was like, I want to get involved. And then what happened? I had an scholarship from Golden Leaf, and they allowed me an internship, where they paid, and I just get to work for whatever organization. I structure my own internship. Um, and I had, for my McNair research, I had also been working on high schoolers and higher education. But then one of my friends decided to do like kind of the same research, and I was like, I don't really want to do that. Like I want to do something else. And like inside of me, I felt like I was like, I have to let that project go. And so then I was like, okay, like what else am I gonna do? Like I was so lost. Like that I had done my lit review. I had my faculty mentor that I had worked really hard to get in contact with, and I had my methods. I had already like this very solid work plan for that project. And then I felt like I was starting from scratch, and I didn't even know like what to do. And I had already started working with Latinx Ed with my Golden Leaf internship, and I had just gotten so attached to those kids. I remember, I think I told you and Ricky this, but like I had just gotten so attached to them, and I couldn't imagine myself like seeing them, like interviewing them, going through the process of like getting them all excited for everything, and then not seeing them through the program. And I was in class one day, and it was in Peabody, and it just came to me, and I was like, I wonder if they have anyone doing a program evaluation. Like they have to have someone. Like it's so like fundamental, like they're nonprofit, they need someone to like, help them evaluate their programs, and for feature funding and everything. And I was like, I wonder if they do. And so I went to you like right after class, and you and Ricky were in the middle of a meeting, I think. And I was like, do y'all have someone doing your program evaluation? And then y'all were like, no. And I offered to do it, and y'all were like, yeah, go ahead. And I was like, really?
Okay. can I add some context here is that I literally, so I, we launched the nonprofit, right? That was October. You were in class. It was great. We hosted, Ricky came up with the idea with 20 under 20 and highlighting 20 Latinx youth in our state that were doing awesome things in our community. And it was like, this is such a beautiful idea. And we are, starting this nonprofit. So let's bring these together and announce everything. And then also announce Somos Carolina, which will serve, our students in the more identity development side of things. So anyways, we were all excited, right? But here's the thing is I'm pregnant, right? So I literally in January give birth to a whole child. And I like before when I was on maternity leave, I was like, it's gonna be great. I was thinking in my head, I remember telling Alice this, who's one of our staff members, and she was like so nice to me because she's a mom, she has 2 kids, and she was just like, Elaine is so ambitious for her maternity leave. She's gonna be, developing all these pieces for Somos Carolina. She's gonna be getting this program evaluation ready. That was in my head. That's what that was what I was gonna just keep going. I was gonna have this baby, I was gonna take care of the baby and then keep working. And let me tell you that is not what happened. And it really, that was part of a huge growth for me, but also the organization is I had to really come to a bit of a full stop. And so Ricky was, really holding down the fort in many ways. And so when I came back, I think that was when you were asking, is probably right around the time I came back. Is that about right? Maybe a little bit before.
I think it was before.
Right before I went to maternity leave. So in that way, we were definitely accepting all the help that we could get in many ways. But then I took off 2 months from maternity leave. Usually I feel like people that or at least women in my life have taken off 3, taken off 4, but 2 was really, and I really could not do work as formally during that time. I had to really focus on becoming a new mom and taking care of Ezra, my little baby, and just getting used to that whole new chapter of my life. And really just for me being, this is connected to my immigrant identity in particular, but just the workhorse that I am, the survival, experience that I've also had to just try to get, whether it was through education, trying to get my high school degree, trying to get my college degree, like it was just all about making it for in many ways. Like I know that's largely reflective of the systems that I was in and that we were a part of, and the ways that they're built. And so that whole mindset, though, it was still with me. And so it was really hard to just hit stop and allow myself to, one, become a mom and, have a really precious baby. And at the same time, recognize that we're in such a newness stage of the organization, literally birthing this organization on the side too. And so I think we had to also learn how to give ourselves grace to also make mistakes in that journey and actually learn from making those mistakes. We'll talk hopefully a little bit more about that concept because that's just been so rooted in this piece about identity that we've really tapped into. So it was just a wild semester. It was wild semester. Just came off maternity leave. Was like, we have to host Somos Carolina. At the time, we also had Glorabelle, who was a new staff member who literally saved us that semester for sure too, just with how awesome she was in keeping everything afloat for recruitment and selecting students and all of that stuff. So when you offered, we are like, yes. And plus you were such an amazing student in our class that I was already convinced that you needed to work with us, like before you even asked. And so, but when you asked, it was like the stars aligned, like you said, very divine moment. And it was like, hallelujah, thank you, Jesus. Yes, amen, come through and please help us with this. And you are so passionate about it. And on top of it, that's your skill set. And it was just like, this is too perfect. This person's walking in the door and offering her services and she's perfect for the role. So it was very exciting, but also you were very much a godsend. So just want to add that little caveat there because that was a whole year. 2019 was a lot of newness for a lot of reasons, but it was great to have the team in place though.
I don't think I realized how new the organization was at that point until literally the other day that we were reflecting on it, and I was like, dang, that really was the beginning.
Yeah.
Everything.
I think that's the other piece about just the hustle too and the grind is just like there's so much happening at once that it's just so fast. Everything happens so fast. And trying to learn, for us this is obviously the first nonprofit that we've ever founded before. So a lot of it's like learning about what is a nonprofit, like how do you do this? What does it mean? What are the things that you need to have in place for it to be successful? And then being intentional on that journey. A lot of it is us learning on the fly, which is like literally my whole life, right? Figuring out how to get to college, figuring out how to be you know, as a student in a certain field, like all these pieces, it was just me trying to figure it out. There wasn't a handbook, there wasn't a guide in that formal sense. And so I think it's really quite meaningful the Latinx Ed came to be in a similar fashion, just because it's reflective of, you know, our journeys and whether that's in schools or whether that is in, you know, the world in many ways. Like we have to figure it out in many ways. But the thing is that we had the passion, and we still do, right? We have the passion and the, I would say the intentionality too, like it means so much to us. This is so personal. Like this work of serving Latinx youth and thinking about identity and how it's molding us and shaping us and thinking about how we live in these roles of being a learner and a leader. Like this is so fundamental to who we are. So there's an added layer of like this work is personal. This work is life-saving. It saved us in many ways too, as we've kind of been on this journey and creating and designing and thinking about all of the things that we wish our younger selves knew. So it is, even though that a bit of a rocky start, let me tell you. And I think that was just part of like the beauty of it though, right? Of it like coming in such a real and kind of like challenging way. And so anyways, that's just a few thoughts there, but I'm like, whew, we're going to just keep on discovering the meanings. But oh my gosh, how is that 2019? That was literally last year. So I feel like we've lived 10 years, you know. I'm like, is it so much that we've been doing? But yeah, I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah, it feels like such exponential growth. Even personally, like we always talk about Somos being a love letter to our younger selves. And, every time that we bring in new people and like, um, we always ask them like about their identity journey and like how, why this work would be personal to them. And it's because it's so personal to us. And I think about like the growth that I've had personally since being here, like all these revelations about, how I got to be where I am as a learner and leader and, as a Latina, and what I wish like I would have known, what I wish someone would have told me when I was, younger, especially like in middle school, such a transitional phase. It just feels like this great big love letter.
Let's talk about that. Let's unpack that, because I feel like, so just for everybody who's listening, so Somos Carolina, right? We've explained a little bit about the program for serving middle school students all the way up into high school. And it really is focusing on identity, right? And so where our work in, before we started Latinx Ed, we're known for our college access work. And so Somos became a way to also approach college access, but in a different way of really helping students set skills and knowledge and really get closer to who they are. And that's the guiding belief there, is that if you know where you come from, if you know essentially who you are, you'll have a clear understanding of where you're going. And so the where you're going could be college, it could be post-secondary opportunities, but the where you come from, that piece, there's, for us, especially in the school system, just a huge gap, right? But not feeling represented or not being represented in, let's say, history curriculum, in different class settings. I mean, our narratives weren't being talked about. So how do you learn about who you are if you're not able to really experience that in the classroom? So for us in Somos was like, that was our intention, is to really bridge that gap for our students and make sure they are receiving information about who they are, their heritage, the talents, the gifts that, that they get to bring to the table because of our culture, and really flipping the deficit narrative of our community on its head and saying, look at all the assets that we have, look at all, and really taking that approach to our work. And so the 3 L's really came from designing Somos, and also being inspired by our previous work. So really zoning in on Latinidad. So what does it mean to be Latino, Latina, Latinx, how was it, Latinx or Latinx? And then also thinking about leadership and learning. And I think one of the biggest distinctions there is that identity, with regards to personal identity, like being Latina, for example, is something that we can't change about ourselves. That's something that is fixed. That is something that, we can't change. You can't change where you were born. You can't change who your, ancestors are. Like that's something that we have that is fixed. But then we have these pieces about roles and the difference between identity and role, and specifically, again, back to thinking about our personal role, but is something that can change. So being a learner, you can choose, you can show up as a learner, or you can show up as a different, different role. Leadership too is another role that we get to play. We can be leaders in a certain moment, creating positive change and trying to transform something, or we can choose to play a different role. And so I think for me, what had happened in my own journey was that I had really, especially with learning in particular, had really, like, learning had become part of my identity. It was something that was very much attached in many ways also to my self-worth. Like, it was very much like I was stressed out about grades all the time. Was like I had to only make A's. I needed to, especially in high school. Oh my gosh, especially when college started coming into the conversation, I was like, I have to, just push the pressure I put on myself, and then I felt also from whether that was society to family, just to make it again back to that survival piece was just huge. And so anything less than an A, I would super judge myself, like really, beat myself up about it. And so I ended up really gunning for that A, which is what happened. High school ended up making all A's. So I ended up being valedictorian. And still, you would think on paper, like this woman who is, or this girl at the time, who is making all of these A's, she's valedictorian, like this is success in many ways, right? Or that's how society has deemed success. But at the same time, I felt in so many ways so opposite of what that perception was. I was not confident. I didn't believe in myself. I feel like my mom really kicked my butt to college, even though she didn't have all the resources to give me, but she was so determined that I was capable, and she believed in me like 10 times more than I believed in myself. But I'm like, for someone to have this kind of quote unquote success or academic success but feel so different, what's there, what's happening there, and why is that? And so for me, what I've learned, and through Somos too, and I'm so curious how the 3Ls have like impacted you, but that I was not letting myself evolve, and I had a completely distorted perception of my role. I thought it was something, and again, back to that self-worth piece, it started to infiltrate in the leadership piece too. So once I got out of school and starting and being in more like, leadership roles and at work, was really, when I would make a decision and let's say it wasn't, there was a mistake, or I made a mistake, or people didn't like my work or something like that, take it so personally. Oh my gosh, like it felt like it would cut into who I was. I was stressed. I had a lot of anxiety around, just trying to perform well. And to the point that I also was losing sight of who I was too. It was like, oh my, it was just hard. It was hard to answer that sometimes. And really I feel like I was in tune with my spirit even. And so for me, once I realized that I was not actually, what was actually happening, this was kind of what happened. I would even say it's recent too, especially becoming a mom. I think that reset, it broke me in a way that was really important to like break a lot of the habits and the mindsets that I had had, right? From growing up in the way, in the, what is it, educational survival complex that is school. And so for me, realizing that the mindset that I had carried with me was that essentially that a fear of failure. Like if I make a mistake or if I change, that will equal failure. And that mindset was something that actually served me when I was in high school. Like I really needed to push myself. I needed to essentially make it, right? And that's when that mindset was helping me. But now having made it, quote unquote, or gotten out of the systems that are like specifically education, I was in a position of privilege now too, right? Like I had more control in my life and I could make different choices that I couldn't when I was a kid, right? So the realization that I could still be compassionate to that mindset, but I also needed to release it, was really humbling. And I've been in that process. I'm still in that process, still in that journey of releasing that. And for me, the growth that's come from it is just allowing myself to make mistakes and allowing myself to grow, and thinking of that piece as a learning opportunity. Like it's completely reframed my mind and how I think about it. So being Latina is something I can't change about myself, but how I lead and how I learn, it's something I get to make mistakes, and that's how I grow. And so my epiphany this morning, Berenice, that I wanted to share with you was that survival, this is okay, I'm still wordsmithing this, but okay. So survival is essentially a fear of failure in many ways. Like it can lead to that severe fear of failure. Thriving is allowing ourselves to make mistakes. And I think that piece about thriving, like even thriving in mistakes, I'm like, what? No, thriving, you're not making mistakes. Thriving, you are like on the mountain peak, life is perfect. That's what thriving. But actually, when I was thinking about it, I was like, oh my gosh, thriving is actually allowing yourself the grace to make mistakes and allowing yourself to evolve and grow in that role of a learner and a leader. And so that epiphany this morning, I was like, oh, That felt deep. That felt like a word because I still like, this idea of making, especially for like someone with perfectionist tendencies, like making a mistake has just been part of the agony, right? And part of the failure and the fear of failure. And so that releasing myself from that and saying, if you're able to make mistakes and you're allowing yourself to make mistakes and you are being, grace, giving yourself grace in that process, like that is part of thriving. And so that just realization was just like, to me this morning where I was like, oh my gosh, the growth. Okay. Yeah. It feels palpable. Like, but that the 3 L's have really manifested for me in that way. And the technical, like how do we actually help students understand that they get to evolve and they get to make mistakes and they can release certain mindsets hopefully earlier, or that we can create an environment where they don't have to bring that mindset into that space, because they can, make mistakes and they can be, in their own evolution. It's just so powerful for me. And so anyways, that's some of my reflections, but I'm really curious how the 3 L's have impacted you.
Ooh.
But yeah, isn't that real though, about that piece about survival versus like thriving versus surviving?
No, yeah, for sure. Something that we've also like, I feel like for me has been pretty mind blowing. I don't know what the word is, but like, just what's the word? Like, it's not transitional. It's like transformational. Is listening to Brene Brown. Elena and I talk about her all the time. I talk about her. The power of vulnerability. Um, but that's one of the things that she does talk about in one of her books too. Like, she has this quote, something about like, you can't say that you're ready to succeed unless you like tell yourself that you're gonna fail. Like, it's not I'm ready to succeed and I'm ready for the possibility of failure. It's I'm ready to succeed and I know I am going to fail along the way. Um, and that's not, it's not tied to your self-worth. I know for me personally, I feel like growing up, the kind of the L that impacted me the most, and I think impacts a lot of our scholars, they just resonated the most, is Latinidad.
Yeah.
It's just something like in the school system, we're not really like represented in teachers and what we learn in classes. And I know for me, it was always I always felt very high contrast because in my home, my parents were both like super, super proud of their roots. And, they always um, pushed us to be the same. And I know like a lot of students don't they might not have parents who are like that. And I know especially here in the history of the United States and like even right now, like it can feel like it's something to hide. And in a very real way, sometimes it is like you're protecting yourself when you're trying to hide your identity, for survival. And when I was in school, I always felt like I had to adapt to the people around me, which was very often like white Americans. And I at home was like, my parents were like super proud to be Mexican, and they were like, you need to be proud of who you are. And I was like, okay, I'll be proud. And so that, I know for me, that was like the big one. It was still very hard for me to be proud of it though, when I didn't feel represented, or I didn't feel like there was a safe space for me to, no one told me it was like, it's okay. It's okay for you to be Latina. It's okay to express all these different things about you. And kind of like one of the questions that we got is like, how do you carry your Latinidad to the workplace confidently? And also, I think kind of ties into another question that we got is like, how do you foster an environment at school that for kids that allows them to embrace their Latinx roots? I mean, for me personally, like, I don't think I was ever, I ever allowed myself to be a Latina confidently until I had mentors like you and Ricky, that the first semester of my second year, that were like, you brought your full selves to the classroom. Like, you brought in, like your Spanish and like your favorite foods, and like you brought your whole selves into those classrooms. And that's when I was like, I can do this. Like, I can bring my full self. Like, they're doing it, and they're amazing people. And for a long time, it just felt taboo. Like, professionalism and being Latina, they felt like you couldn't be both.
Wow.
And when I saw y'all be both, I was like, whoa, like, I can do this too. And that's when I like slowly started like, bringing in and being in an environment where it was valued, where I felt valued, that also allowed me to bring, my full self into the workplace confidently. But I think learning and leadership for me personally have manifested more in my life in the past year as well. Um, and I don't know why that is, why later in life. Learning was definitely like this past grad school cycle where I think I very much resonate with what you said. Like my value as a person was so tied to my role as a learner. And I remember being so scared of like not getting into grad school and like who was I if I didn't get in? And like, I was feeling those rejections already. I was like, oh my gosh, like if I don't get in, like I'm a failure. Like it just felt so connected. And I don't think I realized how toxic that was until after I came back from Mexico, and I just had so many just revelations in Mexico. And I was like, no, like if you don't get in, like your worth. Like I knew my worth, but I wasn't feeling, I wasn't manifesting it in my life.
Wow.
And after I came back, I was like, no, like if you get denied, you are still valuable. Like your experience is so valuable. You have worked at this nonprofit, you've done all these things outside, and like you have so much, you have an abundance of experience. And if you don't get accepted into those schools, like it's not a reflection of you. It's just those schools were not for you, and you were not meant for them, and they were not meant for you, but it's not a reflection of your worth. And I think after that, after I had that realization, I think God was like waiting for me to realize that. And after that is when I got in. And then at the same time, like I feel like now I'm more intentional about like, in the same way that I don't want to attach my value to my losses, I don't want to attach my value to my wins, because then it's easy to like fluctuate between both. And like when you're high, you're real high. And then when you're low, you go the same way. So now it's like allowing myself to be sad and allowing myself to be happy, but not attaching my worth to those things. Crazy.
That's amazing. That's oh my gosh, there's so much there that I'm like, this is great. I'm like, which one do I pick? Because they're so good. But that piece about emotions too, I think there's two things that I'm like really picking up with what you're saying is one, allowing yourself to feel emotions. Like, oh my gosh, seems so simple, but is so radical because we are, especially the way that society has conditioned us, is conditioned men on top of that. That's a whole other thing we'll talk about later. But I mean, it's like we've been excluded or not are allowed to feel these emotions. And then let's add the immigrant perspective, or at least let me add mine, is that we didn't have time for emotions. We're trying to make,
Oh yeah.
it's like you don't have time for those feelings really. And it's like, and also I feel like, or at least is again, I got to speak from from me in particular, but for me as an immigrant trying to make it to these systems, when I was starting to feel these emotions of like, being overwhelmed, feeling insecure, I just had to really push them as far deep as I could and just make it. And that's just part of the journey, part of my journey. And so now that I'm in a different place in time, right, and I'm not in that I don't have to survive. I mean, yes, technically, but I've released that, right? So now me allowing myself to feel my emotions has been so powerful, to think of emotions as a way for me to see what's going on in my body, to think about what's happening in my beliefs, to think about where that emotion was, that's how we get to know ourselves. And so that realization has just changed my life too, because there's times where I'm really straying from especially negative emotions. But here's the piece that I learned recently, or not recently, but like in this past year that has just blown my mind, is that you can really categorize emotions in two different lanes. So trust and love, when we're operating in our minds, right, out of that trust and love lane, then we're feeling emotions like happiness, like joy, like compassion and gratitude. When on the other lane is fear and doubt. And when we're operating out of fear and doubt, the emotions that are coming to the surface are like anxiety, stress, sadness, anger, all these pieces. And so for me, and I went through a coaching experience that changed my life in 2019 with Dr. Anise Fisher. Check her out, life-changing. But for me, what she taught me was that I could use my emotion. So when I was feeling something, I could take a second and actually analyze where it was coming from and kind of think about how I was operating too, and kind of where those feelings were coming from. So so when I would start to feel stressed or start to feel like an emotion like anger or something like that, then I'd kind of pause and be like, okay, how am I operating right now? And it was usually because I was afraid of something, or because I was doubting something, maybe myself, or I was doubting somebody else. And so I was able to really kind of pinpoint where those feelings were coming from and then get deeper in it. Like, okay, so what are the beliefs that are really enforcing that idea? And it really starts with emotions though, in that kind of manner. And if we're suppressing those emotions and we're not really letting them be the symptoms that they actually are of our body and our spirit, we are actually separating ourselves from our spirit. That's what, anyways, I could go on forever, but the fact that you were able to really kind of let your emotions come to the surface and be like, why am I actually feeling like this? Where is that actually coming from? It's just so powerful. So I'm over here like, yes, Berenice. And that second piece that I wanted to note that you brought up that I was just loving it is this piece about building your reservoir. That like there's going to be times in your life where it's going to be a super high, and there's going to be times where life is going to throw you those challenges, because that is life. And if we're not really investing in ourselves and our minds and how we're operating and preparing ourselves for the good stuff and the challenges, then it's going to rock our world every time, if that makes sense. And it's going to rock our world too, but we'll be more prepared because we have built that reservoir of self-care, of community care, and we've really invested in ourselves to be ready for the battles that come ahead. And that piece about, what sounds like you've been building your reservoir for those times where the ways that our minds have been conditioned start to sneak its way in. It's like we know the truths to actually say to ourselves, to combat automatic negative thoughts that sneak into the head, to combat the things that we get told so often too about, the ways that people limit us too, on top of it, for our cultural background, for you name it, for all of the different facets of our identity that we hold. So I'm just over here like, that revelation is so powerful. And I think that's also being reflected in the ways that we want to work with students too, right? Like, how do we help students build their reservoirs for the challenges and the realities that we live in too? And that piece about being from the South on top of it is so powerful, because I think we're still defining, quote unquote, what it means to be Latino, Latina, Latinx in the South. And I don't see that representation in media. Like, I don't see this, like, what that looks like. It's not a common narrative that we're seeing. So the fact that we're all playing this role in defining and bringing, these powerful definitions together of how do we actually be, soy or somos de aquí, somos de allá. Like, how do we actually lean into that? We are from here, and we are from where we are, our families are from too, and we get to be a part of that complexity, and that's where we get to live in. So I'm really excited to kind of obviously keep doing this work, because I think that's part of the revelation I've had too, is feeling way more proud of being from the South than I have ever been in my life. I think at this moment in time, I'm like over here, and I mean, even I think about going to UNC, and I just was not proud of the South. I mean, and that's a complexity too, right? I think there's times where we're not proud of it, and it is what it is, because we have to evolve it, we have to grow it. But at the same time, the idea that we're also part of this fabric, and we're part of the fabric of this community, has also brought me so much healing, and just kind of, being able to have a community that's actually accepting me, whether that's through Latinx Ed or through the communities that we serve. But that has also been a really healing part of the journey of figuring out, okay, how do we actually make our mark in this community? How do we actually push our people forward, our communities forward, challenge, the way the system has been built, and redesign it, break it down, reimagine it, and then also be able to offer a completely different experience for students that are trying to figure out who they want to be as a learner and a leader. And then also, how they want to represent their heritage and their culture and their ancestors. I'm like, woo, like, this is the juicy stuff here. So anyways, I could keep going, because I'm like, oh, there's so much good stuff.
And these are the things that we're learning, like,
I know, right?
one. And I'm like, I'm just now learning this. Imagine if, I had learned this, how, like, 12 years old, like, and it's such like a brain, like, twist. I don't know. Like, right now with my little sister, we're 13 years apart. And
Wow.
like, me teaching her the things that, like, we're teaching our middle schoolers, like, and all these revelations and that we're having, at her level. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, I know Jose said this. Jose is one of our team members, and he's our Somos Carolina program manager. But like, this is our generational wealth. This is what we're leaving, future generations. Like, it took us this far to get here, and there's people who like got us to this point. But imagine what we're going to be leaving the next generation of Southern Latinx youth.
Oh my gosh. It gives me chills because I'm like, this knowledge has in many ways saved my life, you know, like in many ways it has saved my joy. It has saved my peace. I could get emotional right now because, you know, we are accessing our emotions today. Okay. It's just so powerful. And I actually, I'm like trying to check the chat. I'm really not doing a great job, but there was one question that stuck out to me from Brian. What's up, Brian? But he was talking about resonating with the fact that the value of the degree, right? When it's the high school to college, etc. degree has been a symbol of survival. And so his question is, if essentially if we needed the support of our family, did we ever, let me say, did you ever have to reconnect with them during or after college, and how? That is such a great question. Like once you kind of access this new layer of privilege, honestly, this new system of privilege too, and you're learning so much and your life is changing, and your mind is expanding. And I think that question even goes back to our own small towns too. I mean, I'm thinking about like two stoplight town, rural Waxhaw. Okay, like how do you take these ideas that are not necessarily represented there, but have also transformed you, and you know, taking these ideas back home too, to family. I could talk about this, is a whole nother hour session, but let's talk about this one because that's a really important question. Do you want to start off?
Yeah, I mean, oh my gosh, I've had my fair share of, struggle with this, and I think it's something that I'm gonna keep struggling with for, a
Totally.
really time. But I think at kind of like the core of it is just having this love for the people and the mindsets, because I feel like you have to have compassion. You have to operate out of love, like you're saying, like you have to operate out of love and like understand that at one point, I mean, I say you, but like I know I had to understand, like at one point I was also, working with the information that I had, the information that I was given. Like higher ed is such a privilege, and it shouldn't be, but like they have their lived experiences, and I know like I've had to be so patient, and like I try to operate out of, love and like understanding of, where they come from, because I know like I too was, at that point, but I'm that's all I can offer. Like I'm still working through that. I don't know if you have more to say.
Yeah.
I
Well, it's kind of along the lines of what you're saying, or kind of where I think maybe you're headed. So I'm curious if what I share resonates. But it's, I will say, first and foremost, it has been challenging, and it has been another lane of growth, because and I think back to when I was an undergrad, and then I think back to when I went to grad school. So those are different, you know, evolutions of who I was. And I also came from, I have to add this nuance too, from a very religious family too, and from a more conservative to conservative leaning family, from a conservative area, from a religious area. I mean, you name it, like that's a huge other part of my identity that I also love digging into, because that has been so formative for me, and the ways that I've challenged how I see the world, but also challenging my own. Anyways, that's another part too. Was talking about religion. But I think that was part of one of the clashes. I went to a private Christian school for high school. We could talk about that in another segment as well. But for me, that experience was it was super sheltered. So there was a lot of, ideas that were also not healthy for me and how I was perceiving myself and my identity, but also other people too, that didn't align with their kind of more legalistic traditional notions. And so when I went to college, and UNC in particular, and I was very dissuaded from also going there because it was very liberal, quote unquote. And those feelings were, I don't know, like I remember sitting in chapel in high school and being told that like I was likely to lose my faith if I went to a public college or public university. And that piece was scary to me too. I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to find in college, being nervous about how that would change and impact me. But I mean, the punchline here in the story, the end of the story, is that it really transformed me in a really positive way to be exposed to so many different types of thought, so then I could then make my decision on what I believe and what I think. And so for me, I remember women's studies in particular, I went in there and the first day was like, here are the 10 myths about, feminism. And the 10 myths I had literally been taught in schools, at home. I mean, it was like, what? This is not real life. And so I remember coming home and I'm one of 6 kids. We are 5 girls, 1 boy, and a single awesome parent mom. and just coming home to a house full of women and being like, y'all, let me tell you what I just learned about, you know, essentially the gender roles that we have been conditioned to play. You know, I was very excited about this new knowledge, and it didn't resonate at the time. It really, like, there was pushback, and it was hard, and it was especially frustrating. I think at the time too, I was younger. I was still trying, you know, figuring out who I was and and what I believed too. And now I will fast forward now to, and that's been a similar trend with the new things that I learned, right? Going home and trying to think about what I believe, but also how, you know, other people or my family believes too, and how we kind of negotiate that together. But the thing that has really transformed my journey right now in this moment is through me learning how to give compassion to myself. I think when I was learning these new things in college, I remember thinking back to how I had acted in high school or how I had behaved, just not knowing better, honestly, and just not having that information. And not knowing a larger cultural context for things like words or, you know, even culture, other cultures too. And so for me, I remember feeling so bad. I was just like, oh my, I was embarrassed about myself and kind of how just certain things that had gone down, and I had been, you know, nothing huge. I'm just, you know, obviously I'm reflective on myself, but I remember now thinking back and just thinking about how who I was and the decisions I made and the choices I made at an earlier stage of my life were really reflective of my needs, reflective of my environment. And so one of the things that I have a hard time, had a hard time with growing up, and as I think about parents and family members and specifically, I would say maybe parents in particular, is that a lot of the challenges that I experienced kind of navigating some of those pressures I got from my parents, right? For you know, trying to figure out how to navigate this. And so there was times where I remember, especially earlier in my journey, just feeling upset about that and feeling like, you know, getting a little angry about it too, of like, why did it have to be that way? But the other piece that about college and when I was learning was all of the systemic, right? The systemic barriers, the way the system is built, that for, especially I'm thinking about my mom in particular, but that the challenges that she had to overcome to really be able to survive, honestly, as a mom, not just as a learner and kind of in that space. I mean, that was part of it, but honestly, as a human being, of like, there's moments where my family comes, especially if we go back generations, from extreme poverty. And so just the way that that also generational trauma has been passed down, like I started to have all of this language for actually what my family has gone through. And at the same time, it gave me so much more compassion for each other, but for them in particular, as I'm like, there's ways that if I think back to when I was younger, right, and I just didn't know better, or I had a different mindset because of the challenges I was facing, they too, my mom, right, she had a former life too, right, like she had a different time in her life and a different set of experiences that had led her to the needs that she had at that moment, to the mindset that she had at that moment, and the fact that I can be compassionate to my younger self means that I can be compassionate to my mom's younger self too. And that revelation has just given me so much compassion and patience, like you said, as we're trying to figure out what we believe together. And the fact that she gets to evolve, that's the other piece. I think the fact that sometimes we don't let especially our elders evolve and make mistakes because we put them on a pedestal too. And that's challenging. And I think I've definitely been guilty of that. And I still am, you know, sometimes, because that's how I have to release that from my mind. Right. But there's times where I haven't let her evolve. And I think the realization of it all too is that you know, if we're not allowed to evolve as human beings, if we're not allowed to make mistakes, if we're not in the classroom, outside in life, etc., in many ways, that's taking away an element of art, that's taking away what it means to be human, right? And on top of that, I'm like, it gets deeper, because then I'm like, if I'm not letting her evolve and I'm not letting her make mistakes as my mom, right, as my parent, I'm taking away also part of her humanity. Like that is the core revelation that I've had in that journey of like, dang, I gotta be, you know, really intentional and really, you know, thoughtful. And I need to ask questions about what I'm just using my mom as an example, but what she's thinking, what she's experienced, what she's gone through, instead of me coming in there with my belief sets and being like, here, you know, you have to think the same way. For me, it's the transformation. Our relationship has been really positive because I've been listening more. I've been asking more questions. I've been trying to be more patient. It's definitely not perfect. And we have a lot of growth, but the fact that I'm like, I realized when I realized I hadn't been letting her evolve, I was like, wow, that realization of itself was just so freeing to be like, nah, you know, that's not how I can't do it like that, you know? And so that's been one way that I've been able to reconnect with my family and then also prioritize that relational piece of like our relationships first and foremost matter the most. And I think that we take that from that value, I think very much from who we are as Latinos in particular, like that value of how do you say, I always mess up the word, but familialism. Is that how you say it? Yeah. Anyways, English, okay. But that value is so near and deep, and the fact, and I've just really leaned into that too, of how do I nurture, how do I preserve this relationship? Like all of the other pieces we can, agree to disagree, we can figure out in a different way, but what I first and foremost try to prioritize as I relate to my family is those relationships, and maintaining and preserving those relationships, because we only live once, and we only get, a family once too, and life is so short on top of that. And I don't want to miss out on nurturing that connection. And we can figure out, how we negotiate our beliefs, in my opinion, but I'm trying really hard to preserve that relationship too. So that means sometimes avoiding certain topics completely because it's not healthy, or we haven't reached a certain level where we can talk about it right yet. And so we've just, learned more about each other, and when we need to give each other grace, and, kind of pause in that way. So it was a deep question though. Thank you, Brian, for asking that, because it's truly, it's not easy too. But it's also a lot of beautiful growth that can come from it. So, oh my gosh, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah. Sorry. Along with what you're saying, like, I see it connecting back to Somos, because I feel like for me, I couldn't even connect with my family before I could address my own emotions. Before I had the names, before I knew that I had feelings, that I had to express them, like where those feelings came from. When I feel like I had to acknowledge my own humanity before I was able to see it in both of my parents. Because once I noticed it in myself, I was like, hold on, like,
That's
my
it.
are whole other people with like their own journeys. And like it's something so small that we don't, like, at least I didn't analyze. And I was like, once I had that revelation, the patience I had for them, well, I had to start with patience for myself, but then once I did that, I had so much more like patience and understanding for them, because I was like, oh my gosh, like they have all this stuff that, and they probably, like, I have, this privilege of like being able to unpack it and like not having to be in a constant state of survival, but like they haven't had that.
Yeah.
They have tools, and like on top of it, the machismo and the Latinx community in Mexico, like they were never taught to express, anything, or like all of the things that I'm learning. Like I have all these tools, but they never had that.
That's
And like
so deep.
scholars.
That is so, but the fact that it had to start with you seeing your own humanity is so powerful, because that resonates exactly with me. I think as soon as I started to learn how to give myself compassion and myself grace, I was able to extend it to other people so much easier, to those relationships, to those family members. That's deep. Okay. Wow. Oh my, how is it 1 o'clock? Okay.
I know, I looked at the clock and I'm like, dang. Oh my God.
Time is still lying. If you want us to do more, I'm like, I gotta look at the comments too, because I'm paying attention so deep. Okay. But okay, they're coming through. Oh, thanks for the love, everybody. We're really appreciative. I mean, if you want to hear more, okay, do we need to bring Berenice back from virtual, California to do more of these conversations? Just let us know. But this is deep. Whew. And it's 1 o'clock. So I figure we might as well just, leave everybody on a cliffhanger for part 2. Did we get to all of the questions that people asked though for?
We touched on each of them a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. I will say that we did get a question about career fields, and like, how do you choose which career to figure out? And so that's a whole nother conversation in more depth. But here's one piece that I think also applies to the imposter syndrome question we got to. How do you experience, how do you navigate imposter syndrome? And I think they're connected too, right? When we think about what field to go into. I changed my major 6 times, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. So I think that, right, yeah, that piece about letting ourselves evolve though, like this idea that everything is so linear, that you have to do certain things in the same way that quote unquote everybody else does, or the way that society portrays everybody else to do, is just not real. It's not true. Like, it doesn't have to be your reality. You have the choice to navigate your own path, and you have the choice to pivot, to change, to evolve, to test out something and be like, that wasn't for me. I figured that out. You know, we're supposed to be as part of the process. But I think when imposter syndrome sneaks in, or when we start to, you know, doubt ourselves, then it's like, it's fear that's really driving a lot of those decisions of like trying to decide on I remember deciding on my major because I was just so scared of not having a major. I was like, I have to pick something, you know, and that was driven by, you know, me, you know, feeling nervous and scared and doubtful of the whole journey of being a first generation college student. But that idea applies to so many other decisions in our life. And so if we're moving with intentionality, if we're being self-aware and practicing self-awareness, if we're thinking about, what was I going to say, how we show up to and how present we are and the choices that we're making, and allowing ourselves to make that choice and recognize that that's our choice, life just gets so much better. Let me tell you, I'm like, whoo, I think the idea that I remember picking international business as my first major because I had to. That was the mindset that I had, because I was like, I have to, one, pick a major, and two, my mom told me I had to do it. So I was like, I have to pick this major. And that was the piece that in my mind. But the truth was, right, I didn't have to choose that. I actually had the choice to either go again, to accept that, or to go somewhere else. And the lie that I think we've been conditioned to too is this idea of I have to do something. And so that when we start to allow ourselves to lean into our own power and make our own choices and realize that we have the power to make the choice, we start to get in touch with our power on top of that. And that other piece too in work too, that applies in work, even if it's the question we had about like, how do you kind of really show up in your Latinidad too, or be your authentic self. And that part of that is our choice. We can choose to do that. And when we're in environments that are suppressing that or changing that, we can choose to stay or we can choose to go. And choosing to go can be a hard path. I'm not saying that it's not an easy decision by any means. Difficulty, you know, is just part of this part of the experience, right? Of making difficult choices, but it's still a choice, and we get to still choose and lean into that power. And that piece has also kind of reframed how I think about certain decisions, especially in work too. Sometimes I'll get in this mindset, again, it connects to this whole journey of being an immigrant, where I'm like, I have to do this right now. I have to, you know, and then I have to pause and be like, do you actually have to? Like, what is spurring that? And just really just taking a second to just check in with myself. I'm like, I'm making a choice too. I have to recognize that. Like I'm making a choice right now to do this thing, you know, versus doing something else. And so that is a part of, I think, being self-aware too. That's where the self-awareness and figuring out how to do that and be reflective and leaving and creating time for that has been so transformational for me. But that was, I think I just wanted to name that really quick for that person who asked about career fields and we're thinking about imposter syndrome too. But these were such great questions. So thank you to everybody for coming through. Did you have something to add, V?
Yeah, I mean, my to that question, I was just thinking about it a little the other day, and I feel like my path to that one was a little bit different. I feel like for me, I always just had this sense of purpose of like what
Mm.
impact I wanted to make on the world. Like I just had this sense of purpose, so I didn't exactly like choose a major and like attach myself and my value to it. I think for me, it was always like what path. I was always trying to choose what path was gonna take me to that purpose. And so I feel like for me, that's what I was like, okay, you know, this is gonna give me these skills, and that's gonna give me those skills, and you know, I can combine this and this. But I know like ultimately, it's my value and like everything. And kind of like to that question about imposter syndrome, I feel like that helps when you know like you have this purpose and you're not attaching your value to like a specific path, but
Mm.
rather a greater purpose of what you
Oof.
want to do. But like also I recognize that knowing your purpose isn't always easy, and like sometimes you might not have a clear vision of like what your purpose is yet. But
Yeah,
that's
or it's not refined yet. Yeah. Isn't it interesting though that our values are really guiding that purpose though, don't you think? Like if I reflect on and that's the other piece I think that changed my life in college is I did something called Leadership, which is a free spring break opportunity. Check it out if it's at your college. But I was part of the first cohort, and one of the exercises that we did was talking about integrity and this guy explained it. I've never, if you think about the definition of integrity, I think it's, for me at the time, I thought it was like Honesty. I honestly couldn't pinpoint a definition if I was being honest. It just felt like something that was around character and like, I wasn't sure. But how he defined integrity was knowing your core values, like what your innermost core values are, and being willing to go against the grains of society for them. And that definition has stuck with me for all these years because I'm like, whoa, hold up. So that first part of figuring out what your integrity looks like our integrity looks different because we have different values, right? We have different experiences that have led us to care about things differently and more or less, right? And so I did an exercise there where it was like figuring out what our top 5 core values, and there's so many values you can have, but I was really trying to figure out, like, if I had to pick only 5, my top 5, what would they be? And so I did that, and then I looked at my top 5 and I was like, would I be willing to go against the grains of society for these things, like to go against what everybody else in the world is telling me or whatever? Am I willing to really go for them? And that was when I understood integrity. And I think that connected me closer to my purpose, which is what you're talking about too, of like feeling like you're connected to what you're supposed to do in life. Like, this is where you want to be. And so when I started to think about my values and what was resonating with me, it started to make my purpose even more clear. Now, I didn't have all the words to add. I couldn't have probably told you right on the spot, like, this is my purpose, but it got me closer to that. And I think that helps with job exploration, and it helps with figuring out how to pick classes even, it helps with all those pieces. Is like, what are my core values? And what's wild about that piece is that who I was when I experienced that thing called leadership in my senior year of UNC, is those values are actually different right now. And so it's helping me mold and refine my purpose. Some things stayed too, I'll put that out there, but it's getting me closer and closer. So if I'm paying attention to that though, and it helps me do that exercise every once in a while, just to be like, okay, what is really at the top of my list right now? And what am I, even in this moment, to really needing to prioritize? And it just helps all the other pieces come so much clearer. And so that's kind of, anyways, that's what I was resonating with, what you're saying about your purpose. I feel like knowing you is that you are really grounded in your values. And so it does not surprise me that you had a clear purpose when you were in that journey of figuring it out. So I'm like, yes, Berenice, let's go.
The things
and it's
they don't
11
in your college advising appointments.
Wait, say that again.
The things they don't tell you in your college advising appointments.
Girl, can you imagine if we were talking about values in that journey? Woo!
Everything would look so different.
I'm like, oh my gosh. Well, I'm like, I guess we should probably wrap it up because we're over here, we can keep going though. If y'all want a part 2, we'll come through. Do we need to do a podcast? I hear, Jose, let's go. I'm like, it's been really amazing to reflect with you, Berenice, though. And it's so weird and amazing that you are leaving. I think transition's always hard for me a little bit because I'm like, no, we've always had so much synergy, but that synergy doesn't stop. I am very excited. I know, I'm like, this is where the emotions are going to come through because it's just been so magical, honestly, working with you and being able to just, take all the things that we're learning in life and just infuse it in our work, and how we leave this love letter, like we say, for our younger selves and for the youth of North Carolina. Let's go. And that's the big vision of our work. And so I'm just so excited for you to go into your PhD, get all the tools, get all the gifts, and get all the knowledge, get in there, grab it all, come back home. Come back home and share it with us so we can keep growing too. So I have so much admiration for you and how much you've allowed yourself to grow with us together, juntos. It's like so amazing. And this conversation was just so meaningful for me. So thank you.
Thank you. Like, everything goes both ways. Thank you for allowing me on this journey, because I would not be the person I am without you and Ricky and Latinx Ed and all of our team. And like, I want to cry, but I think I had like all the tears at our last meeting. But I also recognize that like this is not the end by any means. Like, I feel like this has literally only been the beginning, because I'm coming back and gonna do more. So.
Oh. Well, that's awesome. Well, I'm, you know, I'm a firm believer in going so you can come back. I think that's a huge part of the journey, and so I'm just excited to support you on your next steps. And I guess yeah, exactly. Okay, let's look. I just saw the first comment. It was like, "Come back home is right." I love that. Well, thank you to everybody for joining us on this conversation. Our first Facebook Live. We made it through. Yes, V. Okay, yes. I am very excited to see some of these conversations and these topics resonating with people. And so I hope you're, you know, stay tuned because we want to keep, you know, exploring these topics. To my class, thank you so much for showing up and joining in this conversation. I know it's a wild time out here in the world trying to navigate a whole pandemic and being a learner. And so there's talk about the growth that you are also going to get from this experience. But it's just honored to be a part of that journey too and figure out how we can support each other. So we'll definitely keep up these conversations in our class. Shameless plug for Education 575. And I'm just excited to see where these conversations continue to take our community at large. So lots of love, V. Lots of love.
Wait, I want
Bye.
to like I have my computer on my thing, so that's not gonna work. But how's the thing like this?
Oh, oh yeah, that is like very Korean. I'm here for it. I'm here for it. Okay, let me take a cute little screenshot. Okay, ready? Here we go. Ready? 1, 2, 3. All right, it happened, y'all. Live. Okay, live. But send your if you want to see more of this kind of content, we'll come through. Drop your questions. We love to continue engaging with with you and learn, reflecting on what we're growing and how we're learning. So lots of love, everybody. Have a great rest of your week. Take care. Ciao. Now I have to figure out how to end a Facebook Live. Okay, bye.